The day I meet Special Agent was supposed to be the best day of my life. I'd worked 9 years for it. 9 years of undercover ops, late nights, missed Christmases, a marriage that quietly fell apart somewhere between my second deployment to the Phoenix field office and a surveillance assignment that lasted 4 months and nearly cost me my hearing in one ear. 9 years of proving, over and over again, that I belonged in rooms where people didn't think women like me belonged. The ceremony was held at the FBI field office in Charlotte. Small, by design, my supervisor, Director Harmon, liked these things intimate. A few colleagues, some family, hands shaken, photos taken, and then everyone goes home. Simple. My mother had pressed my blazer that morning. She'd driven up from Greenville the night before, stayed in my guest room, made coffee before I was even awake. She set the mug on my nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I'm so proud of you, baby." And she meant it. I could hear it in the way her voice caught slightly on the last word. My brother was there too. He'd taken the day off from the family business, my father's commercial real estate company, which my brother had been running for 3 years since Dad started stepping back. He stood in the back of the room with his arms crossed, the way he always does when he's somewhere he doesn't particularly want to be, but showed up out of obligation. He's 6 years older than me. We've never been close, not really, but there was always a kind of detente between us, a mutual tolerance dressed up as family loyalty. My father didn't come. He said it was a scheduling conflict. I'd learned a long time ago not to push back on that particular phrase when it came from him. Director Harmon spoke for maybe 7 minutes. He talked about the qualities that make a good agent: patience, integrity, the willingness to sit inside discomfort for as long as it takes to get to the truth. He looked at me when he said that last part. I'd been the lead agent on an 18-month financial fraud investigation that had ended 4 months earlier, with 6 federal indictments. It was the kind of case that makes a career. When he pinned the badge, the room applauded. My mother cried. My colleague Sean, who'd been my partner on the fraud case, put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled. I laughed despite myself. Afterward, in the lobby, my brother pulled me aside. He put a hand on my shoulder. Not warmly, more like he was holding me still. "You should know," he said quietly, "that Dad is not happy about the Alderman case." I went very still. The Alderman case was the fraud investigation. Gordon Alderman was one of the 6 people indicted. He was also my father's oldest business partner. They'd known each other for 30 years. They built 6 commercial properties together across South Carolina and Georgia. "That's not something I controlled," I said carefully. "The evidence—" "I know what the evidence was." My brother's voice stayed low, but there was something behind it I didn't like. "What I'm telling you is that it affected people, real people. People Dad cares about. Gordon Alderman defrauded 11 investors out of a combined $4.2 million. I know what he did." "Then you know why he was indicted." My brother looked at me for a long moment. "Dad's not going to forget this," he said. And then he walked away, back toward our mother, and smiled at her like the conversation had never happened. I stood there in the lobby of the building where I'd just been promoted and tried to decide if I was more confused or more afraid. I chose confused. I was wrong to. 3 weeks later, a man named Terrence Okafor walked into the Charlotte field office and asked to speak to whoever had led the Alderman investigation. They brought him to me. He was 53, soft-spoken, wore a cardigan even though it was May. He told me he was a CPA, semi-retired, that he'd been a bookkeeper for a property management company in Greenville for 11 years. He set a manila folder on the table between us. "I think there's something you need to see," he said. Inside the folder were 6 months of wire transfer records. 3 LLCs I didn't recognize, a shell company registered in Delaware. And at the bottom of the chain, a name I did recognize. Callahan Commercial Properties. My father's company. My stomach dropped so fast, I had to breathe through it. I kept my face neutral. They train you for that, and after 9 years, it becomes a reflex. But my hands under the table were shaking. "Where did you get these?" I asked. My former employer, Terrence, said, "He's been asking me to falsify records for 2 years. I refused. He let me go last month. I kept copies of everything." I asked him to give me a name. He slid a second page across the table. I looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then I said, "Mr. Okafor, I'm going to need you to speak with our financial crimes unit. Can you come back tomorrow morning?" He said yes. I walked him out, went back to my desk, sat down and stared at my monitor without seeing it for probably 4 minutes. Then I picked up my phone and called my direct supervisor, and I told him what had just walked through our door. What followed was 8 weeks. I don't talk about much. 8 weeks of watching my own family's financial records get reconstructed by a forensic accounting team that had no idea whose daughter was sitting 2 floors above them, reading the same reports they were, in real time. What they found was this. Over a period of 4 years, my father's company had been used as a conduit for approximately $2.3 million and fraudulently redirected investment funds. The money had passed through Callahan Commercial Properties on its way to 2 offshore accounts, one in the Cayman Islands, one in Cyprus, before being redistributed to a network of individuals that included Gordon Alderman. Gordon Alderman, who was already facing federal charges for the original fraud I'd investigated. My father hadn't originated the scheme. That distinction mattered legally, though I'm not sure it mattered to me personally. What he had done was knowingly allow his company to be used as a pass-through, in exchange for a fee that was disguised as a consulting arrangement. He'd signed documents. He'd authorized transfers. He'd known. My brother had known too. That one was harder. My brother had been running the day-to-day operations for 3 years. The transfers in question had all occurred within that window. His signature was on 2 of the internal authorization forms. I don't know exactly when he figured out what I was working on. I think it was sometime during the 6th week, when the FBI sent a formal document request to Callahan Commercial Properties' registered agent, a step that would have been visible to the company's legal counsel, who would have reported it to my brother immediately. What I know for certain is that on a Tuesday evening in the 7th week, my mother called me and said, in a very careful voice, that my father would like to have dinner. "Just the family," she said. "He misses you." I said, "Of course. What else do you say?" The dinner was at my parents' house in Greenville, the house I grew up in. My mother made pot roast, which she only does for occasions she considers important. The table was set with the good dishes. My father sat at the head of the table and talked for most of the meal about a development project in Colombia, a zoning issue that wasn't going his way, his opinion of the current commercial real estate market. My brother sat across from me and ate steadily and said almost nothing. My mother kept refilling glasses that didn't need refilling. Halfway through the meal, my father set down his fork. "I heard the Bureau sent a request to our registered agent," he said. "Dad, I'm not asking you to tell me anything you can't tell me." His voice was reasonable. Measured. That was always his mode, rational on the surface, pressure underneath. "I'm telling you that whatever you think you found, you don't have the full picture." "There's a process for that," I said. "If there are exculpatory facts, they'll come out in court." He said it flatly. "You want to let this go to court." "I don't want anything. I'm doing my job." My father looked at me across the pot roast and the good dishes and the life he built, and he said, "That's always been your problem. You think doing your job is the same thing as doing the right thing." I didn't answer that. I wasn't sure I had an answer for it yet. After dinner, my brother followed me out to my car. It was dark, barely 8 o'clock, but overcast, no stars. He stood on the driveway with his hands in his pockets. "If you do this," he said, "there's no coming back from it." I know. They'll lose everything. The company, the house, Dad's not healthy, you know that, the stress alone. I know, I said again. Then why? I opened my car door. Because 11 people lost their savings, because some of them were retired, because Gordon Alderman is already going to prison and the people who helped him should too. My brother looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was, by then. I drove back to Charlotte in the dark and cried for about 40 minutes and then stopped, because I had work to do. The indictments came down on a Wednesday in October. My father was charged with 1 count of wire fraud and 2 counts of money laundering. My brother was charged with 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of making false statements to federal investigators. That last one added because, it turned out, he'd spoken to agents during a routine interview phase and had lied about his knowledge of the transfers. I was not in the room when they were arrested. I had recused myself from the active investigation 8 weeks earlier, the moment it became clear my family was implicated. That's protocol. You don't get to be the agent on a case involving your own blood. What I had done, what I was required to do, was report what I knew the moment I knew it. My supervisor told me later that my father asked, when they came to the door, whether I had known, whether I had been investigating them the whole time. The answer was no. I hadn't known. I'd reported information that came to me through proper channels, the same as I would have with anyone else. But I understood why he asked the question. I understood what it felt like to him. My mother called me from a neighbor's house because she didn't want to be alone in her own home. She didn't cry, which surprised me. She just said, very quietly, "Did you know this was happening?" "No," I said, "not until 7 weeks ago." She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "What happens now?" "They'll have a bail hearing. They'll get lawyers. The process takes a while." "To us," she said. "What happens to us?" I didn't have an answer for that. The trial took 8 months from indictment to verdict. I testified once, briefly, as a fact witness, establishing the chain of events by which the investigation had begun and confirming the moment I'd recused myself. My attorney advised me to keep it short, factual, nothing editorial. I did. My father's attorney tried on cross-examination to suggest that I had a personal motive, that I had always had a difficult relationship with my father, that I had used my position to target him. I answered every question with the same 6 words. The evidence speaks for itself. The jury deliberated for 2 days. My father was convicted on all 3 counts. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $847,000 in restitution, his share of the fraudulently redirected funds. My brother was convicted on all 3 counts as well and sentenced to 6 years, with the additional time reflecting the false statements charge. 6 years. He'll be 44 when he gets out. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking garage after the verdict and didn't move for a long time. I wasn't celebrating. I don't think I was grieving exactly. It was something quieter than either of those things, a kind of settling, like a building after an earthquake finally stopped shaking. What I kept coming back to was the 11 investors, the ones who had lost their retirement accounts, their savings, money they'd set aside for surgeries and grandchildren, and the quiet, ordinary futures they'd planned. One of them was a 67-year-old retired school librarian from Spartanburg who lost $210,000. She'd given a victim impact statement during the sentencing phase. She hadn't been angry. She'd been tired. She said she just wanted people to understand that the money wasn't abstract. It was years of her life translated into dollars, handed to people she trusted. I thought about her on the drive home. I thought about her for a long time after that. My mother didn't speak to me for 4 months. When she finally called, it was a Sunday morning in March, early before I'd had coffee. She said she wasn't calling to rehash anything. She said she understood intellectually that I hadn't had a choice. She said she needed time to feel what she felt before she could get to understanding. "I'm not there yet," she told me, "but I'm trying." "That's enough," I said. "That's more than enough." We talk now, once a week, usually Sunday evenings. We don't talk about my father or my brother. We talk about her garden, which she's expanding. We talk about what I'm reading. We talk about the small, sustaining things that exist on either side of the wreckage. My father is serving his sentence at a minimum security facility in North Carolina. My brother is at a different facility 2 states over. I went back to work the Monday after the verdict. My supervisor, Director Harmon, stopped by my desk in the afternoon. He didn't say anything about the case. He just set a cup of coffee on my desk and said, "Good work this year," and walked away. That was enough. That was actually more than enough. There's something people don't tell you about doing the right thing, which is that it doesn't feel triumphant. There's no moment where the music swells and you stand in a beam of light and know with certainty that you made the correct call. There's just the day after, and the day after that, and the slow, unglamorous work of continuing to be a person. I was asked once, by a colleague who knew the broad strokes of what had happened, whether I would do it again. Whether, knowing the cost, I'd make the same choice. I said yes, but not immediately. I sat with the question for a minute, which I think was the honest thing to do. Yes, because the 11 people who lost their money deserved a system that works. Yes, because the alternative, looking away, using my position to protect people who didn't deserve protection, would have meant I wasn't actually the thing I'd spent 9 years becoming. But also, it cost something real. It cost my family, such as it was. It cost my mother 4 months of silence. It cost my brother 6 years of his life, which, whatever he did, is still my brother's life, and I feel the weight of that. I'm not looking for anyone to tell me I was right. I know I was right. That's not the same as saying it was easy, or that the math adds up cleanly, or that I don't still sometimes sit in my car in parking garages and feel the quiet settling of a building that stopped shaking. What I know is this. I became an FBI agent because I believe that the truth matters more than the comfort of looking away from it. I still believe that. I will probably believe it until the end of my career and beyond. Some mornings, that's enough. Most mornings, it has to be. I keep thinking about the pot roast. My mother only makes it for occasions she considers important. She'd set out the good dishes. She'd refilled glasses that didn't need refilling. And across that table, my father talked about zoning disputes and market conditions, while I sat with 8 weeks of forensic accounting reports living inside my chest. And nobody said the real thing out loud until he set down his fork. That dinner was the moment I understood something I hadn't fully understood before. That the people who shaped you can also be the people you have to hold accountable. And that knowing the difference between those two things, between love and loyalty, between family and the truth, requires a kind of clarity that doesn't come easy. It has to be built. Slowly, sometimes painfully. What my father and brother did wasn't a mistake. It was a series of decisions made over 4 years, each one chosen over the alternative of doing the right thing. That's what I kept coming back to during those 8 weeks. Not anger, exactly. More like a bone-deep sadness at how many times they must have had the chance to stop, and didn't. The transfers didn't happen once. They happened repeatedly. Someone had to keep signing the forms. And the people on the other side of those forms were real. Terrence Okafor walked into my office in a cardigan and set down a folder and trusted that the system would work. The retired librarian from Spartanburg gave a victim impact statement with no bitterness in her voice, just exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had done everything right and still ended up sitting in a federal courtroom, explaining what $210,000 meant to a life. Those people deserved someone who wouldn't look away. That's the only thought that got me through the nights, when I sat in my car in parking garages and asked myself whether I was doing the right thing or just the procedurally correct one. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to be the person who doesn't look away. It's not one big dramatic moment of courage. It's smaller than that. It's being honest with your supervisor on a Tuesday afternoon when every instinct is telling you to wait, to think, to find a way to manage it privately. It's understanding, clearly, what the evidence is saying, even when what it's saying is devastating. And it's enduring the cost, the 4 months of silence from my mother, my brother's face on that driveway, without letting the cost become the reason to have done something different. My father told me that night at dinner that doing my job wasn't the same as doing the right thing. I've turned that sentence over many times since. I think he was wrong, but I understand why he said it. He needed there to be a difference. He needed my decision to be about procedure rather than character, because if it was about character, then the verdict wasn't just a legal outcome. It was a judgment on the choices he'd made for 4 years. It was. What I know now, on the other side of all of it, is that integrity isn't something you perform in big moments. It's something you either practice in the small ones or you don't. My father and brother made their small choices for 4 years. I made mine on a Tuesday afternoon, when a man in a cardigan, sat across from me and told me the truth. Neither of us chose our moment, but we both chose what we did with it. That's the only thing I'm sure of. It has to be enough.